Family and Friends weekend here at Wellesley. My name's Amy Johnson. I'm a sophomore here at Wellesley, and I'm a recently declared sociology major. And I'm pleased to be introducing Professor Lee Cuba today, and he happens to be my major advisor. He's been with us here at Wellesley for over 20 years and is the head of the sociology department. I first met Professor Cuba when I took his introductory level sociology class last fall when I was a freshman, or a first year, excuse me. It's still hard to get used to that. And the class was titled Deviance and Conformity, so I highly recommend it to any students who are in the audience. And being the Wellesley student that I am, I approached him last fall about potentially doing research for the sociology department. And starting last February, I became one of his research assistants. And the research he's doing is for a book that he's writing with Harvard Press, and also in conjunction with the New England Consortium on Assessment and Student Learning. And this book kind of took members of the class of 2010 at 7 different liberal arts colleges in New England and interviewed them throughout their college process. So starting first semester, first year, all the way through a year after graduation. And the focus of this book was kind of the academic and social engagement of college students during their time on their college campuses. And one of the major points of study was success and the definition of success and what does it mean to be successful in college. And nowadays we kind of have this notion that success is the same thing as getting an A or getting good grades. And these elite institutions that were studied in this project, which included Wellesley, a lot of times we would see that kind of emphasis on acing a class as being what a student would define as succeeding that semester. So the topic of today's discussion is kind of the difference between academic engagement and academic achievement. So to kind of put that in lay people terms, academic engagement would be more learning for the sake of learning, taking a class because you're interested in the subject matter, because you've never taken a class like that before, just so you can learn something new, versus the way we view academic achievement, which often tends to fall along the prescribed patterns of grades or getting an A. So Wellesley implemented a policy this year that Professor Cuba has kind of spearheaded, and this is shadow grading. And the way shadow grading is supposed to work is to encourage Wellesley students, first year, first semester, to come in and pursue academic courses of study that they maybe wouldn't pursue because they feel like they might sacrifice their academic achievement. So to discuss this further, here's Professor Cuba.
I really don't need to give my talk. Amy just gave it to you, so that's a wonderful thing about Wellesley students, too. The other thing I think many of you may not know or know as much about is that one of the wonderful things about being a faculty member here is working with students as research assistants. It certainly happens with greatest frequency in the sciences, but now certainly most of the social science professors I know also work with students, and even English professors are starting to work with students, which is a quite different thing for them. So thank you very much for being here today. I want to, as Amy said, talk to you a bit about an ongoing longitudinal research project that I've been involved in for a long time. And I'll also say before I get started, I'm thankful that Amy said I've been here for longer than 20 years. As some of you know, I've been here a lot longer than 20 years. Okay? So I want to give you a little bit more background on the study from which this particular topic is drawn. We want to talk about how students define success and whether or not those definitions change over time. We're going to look at, as Amy said, engagement in relationship to grades, a major measure of achievement, and how students define success. Have some thoughts at the end about why students talk the way they do about their experience here. And then, as Amy said, I want to talk with you very briefly about Wellesley's shadow grading policy, which was instituted just this semester. The data for this project come from a multi-school study. As Amy mentioned to you, the 7 colleges in this study are Bates, Bowdoin, and Colby in Maine, Smith and Wellesley, both, as you know, women's colleges in Massachusetts, Middlebury College and Trinity College in Hartford. We started interviewing students in the fall of 2006, and as Amy said, we interviewed them many times, 3 times in their first year, every semester thereafter. If they were studying away, we Skype interviewed them, unless they were in Mongolia and we couldn't get through to them. But the idea was to try to capture the immediacy of student experiences, what's going on in their lives right now, because as all of us know, we create narratives about our lives that later on may not parallel what it was like in that moment that we were experiencing it. Broadly, these interviews, which were conducted by students at all of the schools, focused on 4 general areas. We're going to look today specifically at academic experiences. We asked them every semester about every course they were taking. What's your best one? What's your worst one? What makes it best? What makes it worst? What are you learning the most in? What was the least useful course you took, and so on, interactions with faculty. Because we're all residential colleges, we asked them about their life in the dorms and with their friends on these campuses, as well as the extracurricular activities they were involved in. We also asked them broadly questions about kind of associated with emergent adulthood. You're now away from home. How are you managing yourself and your life, your time, your balance between all the competing things that are calling on that time? And then finally, some really interesting questions were kind of both forward-looking and backward-looking. Now that you've been here for 4 semesters at the end of your sophomore year, how do you think you've changed the most, right? And one of the questions that we're going to talk about today that's pulled from this study was one of those. At the beginning of every semester, rather every year, we asked students, what would make this a successful year for you? And that's the answers that we're going to look at today. And this little piece that we're going to discuss with you today comes from a subset of the students. We started out with about 250 students. We retained about 207 of them. This is a subset of students, and as you can see in a moment, it's a smaller subset because you had to have been interviewed every semester through college, and sometimes we miss some students who were not. The sample is heavily slanted towards women, in part because we have 2 women's colleges in this study, but in part that's what higher education looks like today as well. And it overrepresents students of color because the sampling method was set up and designed to do that, students of color as well as international students. So again, we begin with this question every year, a very open-ended question. We worried a lot about how to phrase it. Maybe we still didn't get it right. We certainly didn't want to ask students, what are your goals for the year? Because, that's like white knuckle. My goals, I don't have any goals, I'm lost. What am I going to do? What should my goals be? So we just said, what would a successful year look like for you? And then we coded their answers into 4 different categories based on the answers that they responded to. The first of these we called academic achievement themes. And as Amy already mentioned to you, that was largely for students something about grades. I want to get A's in all my classes. I want to bring my GPA up. I want to get 2 A minuses, 2 B pluses. I want to get good grades. It could be anything, vaguely phrased or specifically phrased. It might also have said something about wanting to improve basic skills like writing for the year, something you really want to work on, or to achieve something, make a big decision in a year, like what are you going to major in, or are you going to study away, something of that sort. That was in comparison to, as Amy already told you, what we coded as academic engagement themes. Okay? These were things that have to do more about self-motivated love of learning. I want to learn all I can this year. I love chemistry. I just want to take as much chemistry as I possibly can because I can never get enough. I can't stop talking about it. I don't love chemistry. I love everything that Wellesley offers. So I want to take as many courses in as many departments as I can. I want to have one of each. I want to explore the curriculum more broadly, so on and so forth. I want to do research. We took those all to be indicators of engagement. The other 2 categories then had to do, again, with kind of life management themes. These were things about developing a useful work ethic or study skills while you're in college that will benefit you while you're here. Again, achieving balance between all the competing demands on your time and maintaining well-being while you're in school. All of those very, very important things to students. And finally, we were interested in the extent to which students said something about wanting to, again, benefiting from being in a residential liberal arts setting. A lot of students talked about making friends or maintaining their friendships over the 4 years. So when you put those all together, kind of thinking of this as a cross-sectional view of student responses, what do you find? Right. Academic achievement themes predominate, right? They predominate over all 4 years. They are the highest of anything, and they maintain that kind of height over the 4 years. Engagement themes really peak in the last year. To some extent, that's an artifact of how we coded things. If you were working on an independent project, an honors thesis or something of that sort, And you mentioned that in your success themes, it would have been coded there. So there's a big spike there for the work that seniors are doing in their classes. Life management themes, there's a big peak in the third year because we coded study away experiences into that. Many students talked about at the beginning of their junior year, I want to have a successful year away. And a lot of that has to do with being in a place that I don't know, around people I don't know, and I want to succeed at that experiment. And then social themes, it won't surprise you that they're big in the first year. Because what do you want to do? You want to make friends when you come to college. And what do you want to do And what do you want to do at the end of college is you want to maintain those friendships, right? You're about to leave, and so you're thinking a lot about how you're going to hold on to your friends there too. So really, first-year students, it's no big surprise. A lot of people have analyzed this in their own studies. When they come in, they want to get good grades, and they want to make good friends. That pretty much sums up the first year, and then it becomes more variable over time. You should also know that students typically would give 2 or more answers to this question. It wasn't just that they said, one thing, good grades. Like I said, the modal response for first years would have been good grades and good friends. But usually they're giving 2 to 3 answers to this question. If you get water.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Please.
So is that student sample already pre-selected from the top colleges? They are more emphasized on academic achievement rather than social, those things?
Yeah, I think this is pretty common. I think if you would go to a lot of colleges, community colleges, four-year universities, you wouldn't find much difference in what students talk about. At least, certainly not with regard to the beginning of college, but I think the emphasis on grades is quite broad across different universities. At least, I've given this talk in a lot of places because I'm always interested, does this represent elite colleges or not? And I get the sense that it doesn't, that it's representative of a lot of different places. It makes a lot of sense. We'll talk about at the end why it does, because we use grades all the way through high school, right? We keep using grades as markers for things. Okay. So again, one of the things that's really nice about a study like this is that it's longitudinal. It's also a panel study. I should have said a bit more about that. Panel studies are longitudinal studies where you're interested in kind of development or growth or something around a particular issue. And so the way a panel study works is you select a group of people at the beginning, and then you follow them. You don't follow their cohort. Well, we did that too with surveys. But when a person drops out, she drops out. She's gone. We can't replace her with somebody else because we don't have that historical record on that student. So it was really important to keep students in the panel as long as we can. Like I said, we retained about 80%, which is pretty good in all of this. But the nice thing, again, about panel studies is that after they graduate, we know what they said when they were a first-year student, right? So we can kind of see how they turned out in a way, given where they started out. So I want to talk about 3 students in particular, but before I do, I want to kind of help you read your way through this tree diagram. Okay, so you already know from what Amy and I said that we start out, this is in the first year, with students focused largely on achievement goals, and again, largely that means grade goals. Okay? So what this tree does, it says that in the first year, 51 of the students out of the 66 we started with, right, said something about grades that in terms of how they define successful year. Okay? So most of them, right? 13 of those students said something about engagement. I want to explore all these new subjects that I didn't have in high school or something like that. So because we asked this question every year, then we could track how they progressed along this grade tree. So if you go up to here, these would be the students who in their first year said something about grades and also said something about grades in their sophomore year. 37 students out of the 51 did that. 10 mentioned engagement themes. As juniors, 29 of these 51 did it, or 37, and so on to 23. So you can see if you follow that arc up, and we're going to talk about Rita in a second. Okay? Rita mentions something about grades every time we ask that question when she's in college. What do you think Rita wants to be? A doctor. You're right. You're great. She wants to be a physician. Very good. Good answer. Okay. So as you can see, and of these 23 students, over half of them, I think about 13 of those students never mention an engagement thing all the way through. That's the Ritas. Then you get the Tinas. So Tina starts out, for 2 years saying something about grades, and then her junior year doesn't say it anymore, doesn't say it in her senior year. Okay? And then we've got Michael down here, who starts off saying something about grades as a first-year student, but then doesn't mention it all the way down. Doesn't mention that that he said something about engagement. He may have said something else, but he's not focused on the grade train as much as the other two people. So I want to talk a little bit, read you a little bit about their stories. The other thing that's great about a study like this is that it's students can tell their stories better than we can, right? And they have a way of talking about their lives. So Rita, you already know about Rita. She's one of those 23 students, and she is somebody who's focusing on grades as a marker of success all the way through college. You've already got to the punchline. She wants to be a physician, so she, needs to focus on grades. It's not unrealistic. So when we asked her that question in her first year, what would make this a successful year for you? She said, successful grades. Grades have always been a big part of defining my success. It's been kind of drilled into me. No surprise, right? In her second year, Rita takes a psychology class that she really enjoys, but then, quote, kind of stopped when she got 2 B's on 2 papers instead of A's. Her best class, as she says, is biology because she's doing well grade-wise, although her, quote, favorite class is organic chemistry. There you go. I know. She defines a successful second year as, quote, acing organic chemistry and raising her GPA from last year. As Rita heads into her junior year, she wants to complete her major, quote, do well grade-wise and score highly on the MCATs. As a senior, Rita defines success as, quote, getting an interview at a medical school of choice and graduating from college knowing that I'll be attending medical school. That's what happens. Rita graduates with a high GPA and gets into a very fine medical school. Tina. Like Rita, Tina starts college thinking that she wants to be a physician and focused on achieving good grades in order to get into medical school. So in her first 2 years, she only cites grade goals in terms of how she defines success. But by her junior year, even as she continues to worry that she won't have good enough grades to get into med school, Tina talks about her, quote, passion for science when asked to describe a successful year. During her junior year, Tina travels to Central America to study away and conducts biology experiments, as she says, and gets her hands down in the dirty with lots of biology all day. She then realizes that she can, quote, actually do science on my own. I'm really curious about a lot of things, and biology allows me to ask all these different questions and then try to find a way to answer those questions. Her engagement with science spills over to classes outside of her major that year. She says, I've never taken anything like philosophy, and every day I walk into that class, and it blows my mind. But even though she's, again, academic engagement themes started to surface for her that year, she's still worried about grades to some extent. In her senior year, Tina continues her love of learning and looks forward to all of the courses she's taking that year. A successful year, she says, to feel satisfied with my classes and that I've learned as much as I can from them, or at least that I've made the best effort I can to learn from all of them. As Tina looks back on her 4 years of college, she realizes that her college has shown her, as she says, that I am more than my grades. We would like everybody to be a Tina, to have that experience anyway. Michael, okay. Although he shares Tina's and Rita's interest in science, Michael arrives at college with kind of minimal concerns about grades. He's a guy, after all, right? When asked what would make a successful year for him in his first year, he says, I think I need to enjoy myself. I think that's the main thing, the key to having a successful year and not getting kicked out of school. There aren't real gender differences like this, but anyway. Okay. The summer after his first year of college, Michael takes linear algebra to prepare for more physics courses. When asked why more physics, he says, all the things they talk about I find really interesting. So I decided to kind of go with that. And the more I do, the more interesting things there are that I want to study. Despite this expression of engagement during his sophomore year, still when you ask him about success, he says, I want to see more places outside of the college and get out into the wilderness. The summer before his junior year, Michael does research with a chemistry professor on campus, and while he finds some of that work tedious, he enjoys the investigative part of it. When asked what would make his junior year successful, Michael says, probably just getting to know that I got the most out of my classes, just to be able to take what I learned in class and then extend it into something else, into the real world. As a senior, Michael is excited about doing an honors project as it affords him the opportunity to, quote, do the whole process of research and not just do the experiment, but plan the experiment and do it and get it published, seeing what it takes to do all that. His definition of a successful year as a senior, getting good, clean data for his project and keeping up with his sport. Okay. Think about what a little of that means. What does it all mean? What are the takeaways here? Why do students talk about grades so much? There's a lot of good reasons why they talk about grades so much. One of them has to do with grades are important to staying in college. Although I would say that for the most people, and Michael was no different in this regard, students aren't worried about grades because they're hovering around a C average or a C minus average, and they're worried about losing the opportunity to go back to school. It's not that kind of thing. It's more about getting higher grades than what they're making now. Colleges also use grades for all kinds of things, right? If you want to write an honors thesis at many of our colleges as a senior, you have to have certain grades in order to do that in your major field. We just don't let everyone do it. If you think you're going to be elected to Phi Beta Kappa or get Latin honors or honors in a variety of other scientific professions, professional societies, you're going to need good grades to get those as well, too. So it's not for, again, good reason that students don't worry about them. And in this last category of thing, and this is kind of Rita, right? An asymptotic A person, ain't no grade too high enough. There is a real concern that students, Rita wants to get into a really good medical school. And she knows that if she can move that, 3.7 up to a 3.85 by the time she graduates, it will improve her chances of doing that. So sometimes there really are career aspirations that are associated with getting those grades higher. But more importantly, I think it has to do with the way in which students come to college, rightly so, feeling that the high grades they have earned to get into these prestigious colleges have come at very hard work at it. They've been the marker, they've been the signifier of actually for them of engagement in many ways and not just achievement. So they look to those quite often as a way in which, like Tina said, they define who I am, right? I had to find a different way to think about myself later on. Why don't they talk more about engagement? One of the reasons we think they don't is that engagement can be very risky for students. It's fine to say I'm very interested in subjects that I didn't take in high school, or a lot of things look really interesting to me, but what if I get in that class and I can't do the work, right? Or I'm going to stumble through it. It will have been a kind of costly mistake for me. And I don't think we do a very good job also as faculty and staff at colleges and universities helping students think more about that, right? What it means to take risks. The other thing that might happen is that if you're pretty good at getting grades, and you can walk into a philosophy classroom, a sociology classroom, organic chemistry, and get a good grade, you can maybe explore a lot more than students who can't, because you don't have to worry about that, right? There's kind of a baseline feeling that I can do this, right? And it really doesn't matter too much what I'm doing. The other thing is sometimes grades just don't matter so much, rather engagement doesn't matter so much to students because other things do, right? They're not going to be constants throughout their times in college. They're going to be moments where friends, where participation in certain kind of activities are actually going to trump, to some extent, engagement. And then this last issue, or the next to last one, engagement is episodic. One of the things we're writing about in this book is how you can't expect or imagine that students will be highly engaged with every class in every semester that they are in college. Just as a way in which, as wonderful as I am in the classroom, if Amy knows, you're not going to love every day coming in to hear me lead a discussion on something. There are going to be days that you'll like more than others. So one of the things we found is that when students are engaged, it's usually, it's around specific courses, specific professors, specific assignments, specific questions, right? And what happens generally, I think, is that you wouldn't think necessarily then that which students would have kind of engagement as a general goal of their learning, right? It's going to be something that they're going to see in particular ways as they're in college, and then maybe, to relate to this last point, maybe it's just expected, right? You're coming to a very good college that emphasizes and cares about good teaching and engagement. Maybe it's not something that you need to set as a successful goal because you're going to get it anyway. So what? So maybe, is there a mismatch between our institutional aspirations, goals, and students' definition of success? If you go to any of our mission statements on our websites, right, they're rather lofty, right? Making differences in the world, right? There's a wonderful one from Bowden. It's like to be a friend of nature, right? To walk along with art, and all these things. To lose yourself in generous enthusiasms, those kinds of things. Yeah, right. But then we don't want you to get lost too long because you come to college and you're going to get grades, right? And we want you to get good grades. And we're going to use grades as markers for things in college. So there's a little bit of kind of maybe talking out of both sides of our mouth on that one. I think that what it does speak to is trying to urge students earlier on to think about success in college in broader terms than grades. It's so easy when students come into my office, and I'm their advisor, to ask, how's it going? And it's very easy, especially for new students, to say, oh, my economics class is going great. I just got a midterm back, and I got a B+ on it, right? And that's not what I want to say, but I could have started the conversation in a different way. I could have said, what are you studying in your economics class right now? What do you find interesting about that? But I think that open-ended question kind of invites the notion of I'm doing well because my grades are high in certain courses and not others. And then finally, you have to worry a little bit, and again, I don't want to give you the sense that, again, somebody like Rita didn't have engaging experiences in college. She did, right? But we were interested in this particular way in the extent to which those experiences or seeking of those experiences is something you put into your goals for the year or what you want to accomplish for the year. It didn't make it into Rita's list of things she wanted to accomplish, but she clearly was engaged in different classes while she was in college. It's not that these two things are exclusive of one another. I want to end, as Amy said, by talking a little bit about Wellesley's shadow grading policy, and it's something that I've been working on at the college for the last 2.5, 3 years, and it did come out of this research in many ways. What is it, and why did we adopt it? So let's just talk about, and to go back to the question, why did we adopt it, and why do we hope students will use it, or how they'll use it? Those are really the same question, because we adopted it hoping that students would change their orientation to the first year. What is it? It's not a change in how we grade in our classes, but it's a change in how those grades are shown to other people. So the first semester transcript of Wellesley students beginning this semester will show notations of either P, pass, or NP on them. They won't have A, B, C, D, or F, or withdraw. Well, withdrawal would be different. If you get a D in the class, you get a P. You passed. If you don't, you get no pass for that class. Students will see their grades in a grade report. It's very, very important. I'm a big believer in that students need to understand what the standards will be at the college. I don't think they need to wear the grades are on their chest as Hester Prynne did in their first semester of college, either privately or publicly in that way. And so this is an attempt to say, here are the standards, and you'll get graded work all along. Your first exam might be an A-, might be a C-. And you'll get grades all the way through. But as long as you end up with a D in that class, you're going to show it as passing. Obviously, then those grades are not going to be in the calculation of your GPA as a college student. They'll be taken outside of that. The writing program is a special thing. You may know that Wellesley has a required writing course for all first-year students. Those are not all taken in the first semester. So if you take it in the second term, you will also have that shadow graded. We didn't want that to distort enrollments. And very few people will see the grades. The idea here is really, really, really to make them shadow grades, to not use them broadly, to not give them to medical schools or law schools, as Swarthmore hasn't since 1968, as MIT hasn't since the 70s. So why did we do it? We're hoping that it will help move a little bit what we've been talking about today, move students more towards academic engagement and a little bit away from academic achievement. To help them figure out that, again, success can be defined in a number of ways, not just in grades that they're taking, but also to really do take a risk in your first semester, and you probably will get a D in the course. You don't have to worry that you're not going to pass that course. It has also particular ramifications for other departments. Mathematics is a good example. Math places students into calculus courses based on a placement exam over the summer. Many students get placed into the second course because they've had calculus in high school, but they don't want to take the second course. They want to take the high school course that they took again at Wellesley. So the math department is looking to see, for example, do students who get placed into 116 instead of 115 stay in it? Right? Because they're not going to be worried now about making a B- in that class. Actually, some students drop it sometimes because their grade is low, and then they're down a unit. So it can have all kinds of particularistic ramifications throughout the college, and we'll see how that works out. The other thing that I think is really important, I think we have not done a good job of putting up a big roadblock at the beginning of coming to college and saying it isn't high school anymore. Most students think college is going to be super high school, I think. Longer tests, harder tests, right? Longer readings, harder readings, more things you have to do on your own, right? Outside the classroom. And it can, and it will be all of those things. But it's also different ways of thinking. It's different ways of reading. It's different ways of taking responsibility for the subject matter. That takes practice, right? And we're hoping that students will avail themselves of that in the first semester, practice it, right? If you don't, it's kind of a wasted opportunity to my mind. The other thing we hope students will do is also practice their work on basic skills, right? Use that year to think about how you will become a better writer, college writer, how you will become someone who can engage ideas in a very different way. And think about, again, what's working and what's not working. Students are very good, as we all are, about thinking about, well, I'd like to change this in my life, right? I'd like to do that differently. And then we go off and don't. Right? We just go off and live our lives, as many busy students do. This is really a moment to stop and think again, what do I need to do to make this a successful journey for me, a successful 4 years at the college? And I think there's so much going on at the beginning of the year that we don't recognize that plays into that we ought to give students more time about. And finally, like I said, for many students, this will be the first time that they've lived away from home, from family and friends. How do you make home again in a new place? How do you live with people that you didn't grow up with and don't know, right? How do you manage being away from your other home, right? The one that might be in California for you, or in Sweden, or Africa. It could be anywhere, right? I think this policy is not just intended to as students to kind of refocus attention on kind of learning instead of grades, but it's also meant to give students time to manage all of those multiple transitions. Because the longer it takes you to work that out, whatever that might be for you, the worse it is for you. If you start your sophomore year and you haven't figured out ways to balance your time, right, effective study skills for you, and things, you're going to be panicked, right? Because you're going to feel like, oh my God, everybody's now restarting college in a very different way, and I feel like I'm still in the first year saddle here. So there are a lot of things that need to be managed when students come to college. A lot of professors don't recognize that because we're just looking at you from the standpoint of what you're doing in our class. But this policy is really meant to be holistic in that sense, to think about everything that's going on, to give you an opportunity to actually join something when you come rather than stay away because you don't know how much you're going to have to study. As I tell students, believe me, if you don't join anything by October 15th on Friday night, you'll have nothing to do but study, right? You need to find something that will, give you some sort of balance, some sort of something that interests you besides the classes that you're taking, and spend some time with that as well too. It's going to compete with other things. And then I just want to acknowledge at the end, I have a lot of colleagues that are working on this project. I'm writing this book with 4 of them people, you see on the list here, and to also thank the people who have generously supported these projects. We've had a lot of foundation support. We also have had a lot of support for our colleges from it. But we also have 10 minutes for questions, so I'm happy to take those, please. Oh, thank you. Thanks. Thank you.
Goals that you say you hope the students will follow through in this first semester, that you hope they'll learn how to do this, you hope they'll think about this way, are those made explicit to the students and mentored and guided so that they know this is their job while they're getting a P or an MP?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yes. Because I think one of the things about this policy, first of all, I should back up and say the faculty voted this policy for a 4-year period. So if we don't re-vote it after 4 years, it will go away. In order to achieve those goals, you're absolutely right. You have to tell students, this is why we did it. Take advantage of this opportunity. Don't ignore that. Otherwise, it won't work. And kind of paralleled with that, we have a number of ways we're going to try to assess whether or not students really did that or not. So one of the things we're already doing is looking at course selections for this fall relative to the last, let's say, 3 years in gateway courses for first-year students. So, for example, did more students enroll in chemistry this semester or philosophy this semester than they have typically in the other years, to see if they're kind of branching out in terms of the kind of courses that they've taken. Yeah.
And are the freshman advisors working towards this, with their groups?
Right, they are. And I think over time, we weren't able to do it this year, but the first-year policy, right, but we're hoping that first-year advisors will, in subsequent years, get information from every instructor that their advisee has. So if I got a mid-semester report from all of Amy's, let's say, other instructors, I could have a conversation with Amy about, in English, it sounds like, your papers are beautifully written, but you're not talking in class enough. Why not? So we could talk about those kinds of things, and we just didn't get to that this year. But yes, it definitely was a part of first-year advising training this year. Please, yes. Go ahead.
Certain universities have adopted a different methodology to encourage student engagement and take away to a degree the risk to their grades. For instance, I'm thinking about Brown University model where students are allowed to take any course on a pass-no pass basis in any year of their study, and also they have a window of changing the grade option until very late in the semester. However, I also noticed that that along with their open curriculum policy, not many schools have followed them. They're kind of very unique in that. So in your research, do you look at a model like that to encourage students to be more engaged and not worry too much about the grades? And what's your opinion of that?
Yeah, that's good. So one of the schools in our study, Smith College, is very much like Brown. It has an open curriculum in the same way, too. Wellesley, you could take every course at Wellesley, pass-fail, if you wanted to, credit non. If you want to. Most students don't know that. Most students certainly don't do that. But some departments have rules about major. I think what happens at schools like Brown and Smith is that the substructure, which means if you want to get Latin honors, then you have to do distribution requirements. They have kind of a hidden curriculum to that open curriculum. And so I don't think there's a lot of evidence that students in those settings work much differently because they tend to be driven by that same sort of thing as well. And when we all have majors. I mean, one of the other things we write about in this book is the major the best way to structure engagement in college? And I have big doubts about that. I think that there might be much better way. We do that because that's what happened for us, right? We went to graduate school in a field. So when you come to college, the way in which we present a curriculum to you is by fields. Right? But I'm teaching some courses that are very much like some history courses that are being taught here, that are very much like some politics courses that are being taught here. What would it mean to kind of, draw engagement across the spectrum of disciplines? So I think that's an interesting question too. Please, yes.
Could you discuss the sample a little bit? I think I'd love to actually see the numbers again, but I believe that you said that there was an overrepresentation of minority students of color
right.
and international. And I was just wondering what that breakdown actually was and how you thought that might have influenced some of the results.
Sure. So that's a really good question, too. We started this project by selecting 36 students on each of these campuses before they came to college. And the way they were selected is through a race-stratified sample. So we had 6 students who were African American, 6 who were Asian American, 6 who were Latina, 6 who were international, and 12 who were domestic white students. We overrepresented students of color to begin with because we thought that their experiences haven't been studied as much as other students in colleges, and we wondered if they might be different. One of the big surprises for us in this study is that for the most part, they weren't. And that has to some extent to do with a lot of the students who come from those groups coming from, again, very good high schools and things. They weren't in underprivileged situations before. A good example would be the majority of the first generation students in our study, which are students whose parents, neither parent, went to college, are not students of color. They're white students. So it's surprising to us that race didn't show up more. Where it does show up, as you might imagine, is in experiences with diversity on campuses. There are oftentimes students of color will have a different way of talking about their campuses than the white students on the campuses or the international students. Yeah. Please, I just don't want to. Yeah.
First of all, I'm fascinated by this topic. I teach at the high school level. I think grades for all kinds of reasons are pedagogically unsound. I wonder how your study, though, accounts for the basic reality that college is very expensive.
Yeah.
And that many of these kids, I think, believe, either from their parents or on their own part, that academic achievement is necessary to justify the expense of college.
Yeah.
So they feel driven to do that for that reason alone. And so engagement, while that's wonderful, they don't have time for that.
Yeah, that's really good. The cost of education drives a number of things. There's a chapter in our book on time. And, there's a real way in which students feel like, if they're in a course where they're not benefiting, I just wasted all that money, right? And they feel it even if their parents or their families don't make them feel that way about it. So it's a real concern for a lot of students. I think that one of the things, I'm not against grades. I should say that at the beginning. And I think that what I'm against is grades driving out other kinds of things. A lot of time, grades track with achievement. So if you really, really, really love a subject, you work harder at it, you get a better grade as a result of having done that. The things that are of concern for me is we have a student in this study that we profile who is pretty good about focusing attention on engagement all the way through college. And by the time he's a senior, he starts taking easy classes so he can get his GPA up, right? And it's a response to that. It's one of the things that, like I said, we're never going to be able to get rid of external influences. There are all kinds of things both before students come and after they leave. A lot of employers won't come to campuses now unless, right, students have certain grade point averages in certain subjects and kind of things. There are drivers for this everywhere. I'm just trying to think about what can we do in our own little worlds to try to make these 4 years different from that. And we can't do everything. We can't get rid of grades. But we can try to talk about them in a different way and support students to enlarge their definitions of success beyond grades. But you're absolutely right. There are many, many factors here working at that set.
How far in advance do you let an admitted student know about this shadowing grading before they come to campus?
Okay.
And has there been any pushback from current students knowing that these new students are coming in with their first semester?
Yeah, that's right. That's a good question. So it's like any other change in college policy. It was voted 2 years ago by the faculty, and we have a lag year, and admissions goes on the road starting at the beginning of the summer, and everybody who comes in through recruiting heard about this, right, as they were coming in. So there was a lot of that. Again, I spoke at orientation about it after they were already here, so we've been trying to reinforce that message. Your other question, about the students who are here. Yeah, that's been interesting to have conversations with them. I think many students would have liked to have had that when they were here. I think students who got high grades their first semester probably would not have liked that to have happened. And that's the point, regardless of whether or not your grades are high or low. They're your grades, but they're not on your transcript, or they're going to be used in a different way. So I think the response has generally been positive. Amy would maybe have a better take on this than I would, but among students to this policy, the change in policy. Yes?
Does this have any impact on your admissions policy up to this point, or do you expect it would? Because I think there is a type of student that wants to come to a highly competitive college where every grade matters.
Right.
And do you try to sort of balance that off to bring in students who would be more benefiting from this more relaxed attitude?
Yeah. So I think that we've worked closely with Jen Desjardins. She was on the committee that implemented this policy with us, Sedina mission here. I don't think it had any effect this year. I think it might have a positive effect for us in future years, as it does for Swarthmore. Some students are looking for colleges that allow you to take those kind of risks and have more flexible policies because they're tired of being graded. They've been graded every 15 seconds through high school. I don't think it's going to diminish. The pushback has come from concerns largely from parents rather than students about, will my daughter get into medical school or law school now if Wellesley doesn't give those grades out? And I have every reason to believe that she will because at Swarthmore and MIT, lots of kids go to medical school and law school, and they have a similar policy. So, but it's a good question. Yes?
I had dinner last night with two first years, and one of them is medical school bound, and she was under the understanding, and it sounds like she's mistaken, that she can release her first semester grades if she chooses to.
She can.
Oh,
They just won't be on her transcript. And she can give her grades to anyone she wants. If I taught her in her first year and write a letter of recommendation, I can say, Susan was an outstanding first-year student in my beginning chemistry class. She got an A. She was one of 4 students to get an A. There are all kinds of ways to give that information out, but the student will not be able to give a transcript to a school with those grades on it. Okay, so yeah, there is a big difference between those two. Yes?
Marilyn Joe, 1955. I wanted to say that in our sophomore year in college, they gave us all a time study track, and it was very helpful because we then discovered how we were using or misusing our time, and I think it might be beneficial to today's students.
Yeah, right, and to do that as early as we can, maybe too. That's a great idea. Please. Yeah.
Did you do any research or have you seen any correlation between this and the students' general well-being, their mental, spiritual health, and physical health?
Yeah, yeah. That was one of the real drivers for me at the beginning of this, for why I thought it would be important to try to calm things down. There's a lot of anxiety going on, right? And there's a lot of stress associated, especially with new students, of how am I going to be in this place and how is it going to work. So we're definitely hoping, and we're trying to actually measure that as well. Measures of kind of, like you said, psychosocial well-being in the first year. Do those improve in the first year? And we'll see if that happens or not for students. But we're hoping that we can at least, the way I tell about it with students is, we're at least taking grades off the table in the first semester, and of course then the student said, well, I don't want them off the table, I want them on the table, right? Because that's how I know myself. So there's an anxiety to also saying that too, taking away something that's been important to people for a long period of time. Yes?
Are the other schools who participated either implementing something like this or doing something different with the data?
Right, so that's a good question. This was a study that was designed to be an assessment project, not just a research project, to make change. So no other school is doing this. Many of the schools have changed their advising programs dramatically around this. And again, the way they communicate with students, how they talk to them about what's important in different years, and how they start the sophomore year. For example, Smith has come up with a new sophomore year orientation program out of their work on this. So yeah, it's been great for all of us to not only learn about ourselves, but to study ourselves. Maybe one more question. Yeah.
Has any of your research looked into the fact that the colleges and now some of them are becoming SAT optional and how that affects their enrollment?
Yeah. So I'm trying to think. Two of the schools are, Bates and Bowdoin are both SAT optional right now. And they've been that way for a long time. But we didn't look into that too much. Yeah, we didn't. A lot of the admission stuff we didn't look into.
You said MIT has been doing this for years,
Yeah.
decades.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, MIT used to take the whole year and shadow it.
And so what is their experience versus differences between what you're seeing in your data versus what they're seeing?
Yeah.
Seeing their data pool is much richer, more robust.
Yeah, I don't know that they have a data pool. I really don't know that they kept up much with that. I know why they went from 2 semesters to 1 is because they thought students would game this, as they call it, game the system. They would try to take all of their hard courses in the second semester so they would be shadow graded. You can't do it in 1 semester because you have to have introductory courses to get into those other courses. That's the only thing I know about MIT. MIT's certainly not getting rid of it, but I don't know that they've studied the effects of it much at all.
Which means they're not willing to release it.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know, I wouldn't be so sure. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed your time here.
So when's this going to be published?
Oh, it's not going to come out till